Tonight, the hearings for Judge Kavanaugh winding down, but today, Democrats, like the previous days, having a really tough time getting answers to the questions. Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal, he's one of the Democrats on the Judiciary Committee grilling the Supreme Court nominee. He will join me to discuss Kavanaugh and our president. Then Barack Obama, he is back and in a big way, going directly after President Trump in his most pointed attack yet.
We are Americans. We're supposed to stand up to bullies, not follow them.
And Rick Pitino, he joins RFL. The wins, the losses, the scandals, and more. The Hall of Fame coach will join us tonight. Evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thank you for joining us this Friday night. We begin this evening with the fourth and final day of Judge Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation hearings for the Supreme Court. Well, today, witnesses from both sides got a chance to speak. One of them, none other than John Dean. You will remember him. He a member of history as he was Richard Nixon's White House counsel, so he knows a little something about presidential power and the abuse of that power. Dean, he was also a key witness at the Watergate hearings when he spoke out about Nixon's abuses. Well, today, Dean was back on Capitol Hill.
If Judge Kavanaugh joins the court, it will be the most presidential powers-friendly court in the modern era. Republicans and conservatives only a few years ago, I know well, fought the expansion of presidential power and executive powers. That's no longer true. Judge Kavanaugh has a very broad view of presidential powers. For example, he would have the Congress immunize sitting presidents from both civil and criminal liability. Under Judge Kavanaugh's recommendation, if a president shot somebody in cold blood on Fifth Avenue, that president could not be prosecuted while in office.
Presidential power and the current president, certainly big topics in the week's hearings. Senator Blumenthal, one of the people asking some of the toughest questions. Here, the Connecticut Democrat asking Kavanaugh how he would handle a case involving the president.
I would like your commitment that you will recuse yourself if there is an issue involving his criminal or civil liability coming before the United States Supreme Court.
To be consistent with the principle of independence of the judiciary, I should not and may not make a commitment about how I would handle a particular case.
Blumenthal also pressed Kavanaugh about Bob Mueller's Russia probe.
I want to make sure I'm understanding your question correctly.
It's pretty simple English. Have you talked about the special counsel with anyone in the White House?
That was
anybody who works for the President of the United States.
Right, you just rephrased the question, though. That was about Mr. Mueller this time, and it previously was about the investigation. But I've had, if I'm understanding the question correctly, no discussions of the kind you're asking.
So you're saying no, you've had no discussions, you haven't talked to anyone in the White House about Robert Mueller or the special counsel investigation.
So you changed the question again, Senator.
Okay, Senator Blumenthal, he joins us now. First, want to start, Senator, with something that President Obama said today. He said that the president poses such a threat to America that he believes literally democracy is at stake right now. Do you believe that's hyperbole, or are those the stakes we're looking at?
I think we're in a moment of constitutional crisis with the president threatening to investigate a major newspaper simply because it publishes an op-ed that he finds offensive. We're in a moment of constitutional crisis because Donald Trump himself is an unindicted co-conspirator, and he's nominated a potential justice of the Supreme Court who could sit on a case involving the president's own civil or criminal culpability. And that's why this nomination is so important, and why documents relevant to that nomination have to be given to the United States Senate. Right now, the Republican leadership and the president are hiding and concealing tens of thousands of documents that are directly relevant to this nomination. What are they hiding? Why are they afraid of the American people seeing it?
You know, Senator, a viewer said to me earlier today, you know, Rich, regarding Kavanaugh, It's the same thing, different candidate. They always fight about the documents. There's really nothing new to the process this time. How would you say to someone in the public who says some documents have been kept confidential, what is so unprecedented about this particular nomination, the lack of transparency?
Keeping some documents marked confidential, even though there's no national security or classified designation appropriate, may not be unprecedented. But what's unprecedented is doing it without any bipartisan agreement. And what's even more unprecedented and really outrageous is completely concealing and hiding more than 100,000 documents that relate to a period of this nominee's life that he has said was most instructive and transformative in his professional life. The Republican leadership and the president are still continuing to hide and conceal those documents, and we want to know what's in them and why they are so afraid of the American people seeing them.
Senator, I know you pressed the issue we showed our audience as it relates to executive privilege. Also, you asked if there'd be a recusal by Kavanaugh if confirmed, and you didn't get any straight answers, nor did you as it related to some of President Trump's comments about Justice Ginsburg, also what he said about Justice Curiel. Have you gotten any clarity on who Kavanaugh is? And is this par for the course where people artfully evade questions, or are we at a different level now than we've seen before?
Judge Kavanaugh had a mantra. It may be a case or an issue in a matter that may come before me, which is no excuse for the equivocation and ambiguity and, frankly, the dodging that he did on some of these key issues. Not only on the independence of the judiciary, where he really evaded some of my key questions. For example, what will he do to defend the judiciary and its independence against attacks by the president? But also on issues like Roe v. Wade. He refused to say he would not overturn Roe v. Wade. He refused to say whether he thought that decision and others were correctly decided. And so workers' rights, consumer rights, the rights of people to marry the person they love, the rights of women to decide when and whether they want to have children, all those rights are at stake here, and he could be the critical fifth swing vote on a 9-member court to overturn those rights.
Do you have any insight if any of the few Republicans that were seen to have questions before this confirmation process, that whether it be a Murkowski or a Collins, that because they didn't get clarity on the Roe question, that they may not be sure yeses? Do you have any idea at this point that this won't just simply go along party lines?
No vote that we cast will be more important than this one. As United States Senators, there is no vote that will have more consequence for our lives and for our children's lives, because this nominee is going to be on the court for decades to come if he is confirmed. And he will be a critical vote in deciding whether people can marry the person they love, whether women can decide when they become pregnant, whether people who suffer from pre-existing conditions like diabetes and heart disease and high blood pressure and mental health issues and many others will have affordable health care, whether there'll be clean air and water, whether workers and consumers have rights. There's a lot at stake here. So I hope there will be a bipartisan vote. And if there is, on the merits, I believe that my colleagues will hopefully stand up for those rights, but also for limits on an imperial presidency, because Judge Kavanaugh has a view the president can disregard and refuse to enforce a statute if he thinks it's unconstitutional, even though the courts have upheld it, a prior president has signed the law, and Congress has approved it. He can decide to nullify it. And for Donald Trump's presidency, I think that's pretty dangerous.
And finally, one last question to that regard. Obviously, between what we've learned from the Woodward book and obviously the op-ed piece in the Times, this idea of a silent resistance, of a group of unelected people who are deciding which orders to follow from the president, what to keep from the president, do you look at that as patriotic, or are you concerned that that's not what a republic is? We're getting into really scary territory here.
What we need, rather than anonymous resistors, is really people who will come forward and stop a very dangerous and deplorable course. The op-ed talks about an amoral president who has no principles, a president who is unmoored to basic rational governance. And that is a frightening prospect that cannot be cured in the long run by an anonymous group of resistors. We need those people to step forward to either resign in protest, which is a long-established tradition when people have moral objections, or a practical objection to a course in government. And we need real checks and balances in the system from Congress and the courts, not an imperial presidency, which unfortunately is what Judge Kavanaugh has in mind.
Senator Blumenthal, I know it's been a historic week for a lot of reasons, not all of them good this week, but I appreciate you making the time and obviously having a front row seat to some of the more seminal moments. Thank you again, Senator. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And up next, dueling presidents. Barack Obama lashing out at President Trump, then Trump responds. We're going to show you the back and the forth, and we'll discuss.